Imagine a country that, well, it basically multiplies its wealth by more than 25 times in just a few decades.
Right.
And it achieves like 100% youth literacy.
Yeah.
And you see its young women just completely dominate the adoption of digital technology.
It's an incredible setup.
Yeah, I mean, if you were just looking at a spreadsheet, you would think this country is an unstoppable economic juggernaut, right?
Oh, absolutely. You'd be pouring investment capital into it.
But what if I told you that this exact same country is also facing a completely flatlining population, a massive crisis of chronic lifestyle-driven diseases, and perhaps most shockingly, of all its most educated, digitally connected citizens are sitting entirely on the sidelines of the workforce.
Yeah, it sounds like a total contradiction. I mean, we are so conditioned to think of economic development as just this straight line upward, you know?
Right, like a neat little
Yeah.
staircase.
Exactly. The wealth goes up, so the health goes up, everyone gets a great job, and the society just thrives. But the reality of how a nation actually transforms its socioeconomic DNA is, well, it's so much more complicated than that.
It's messy.
Incredibly messy. It is full of structural paradoxes, unintended consequences, and just massive friction points.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly complex, but, I mean, it's entirely fascinating for you as a listener.
Yeah, really.
We have a set of source materials that have been custom tailored to explore exactly this kind of paradox. We aren't just looking at, a dry, dusty stack of data tables.
No, definitely not.
We are looking at a meticulously designed, highly curated, 15-slide academic presentation outline. And it's designed to decode the Armenian transformation from the 1990s straight through to the 2020s.
And the way this data is presented, it's actually making a statement before we even get to the numbers.
Oh, for sure. The aesthetic is purely analytical. To set the visual vibe for you, just imagine the cover page of this presentation, slide 1. It has this pure white background, like absolutely minimalist.
No clutter at all.
None. On the left side, there's a sleek, light gray, incredibly thin wireframe map outlining the geography of Armenia. And on the right, perfectly aligned, is this stark, dark gray sans serif text.
Right. There are no generic stock photos of people shaking hands in a boardroom or whatever.
Exactly. No flashy 3D effects, no gradients. It screams top-tier academic rigor.
It really tells you that we are going to look at the structural reality of this nation without any distractions. And our mission today is to dig into the mechanisms behind those stark visuals.
Yeah, we aren't just going to read off the statistics.
Right. We need to understand how a country actually executes a transformation of this magnitude. So we will be looking at 4 core pillars, which are laid out right there in the executive summary on slide 2.
And that slide is just a clean 4-grid infographic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. 4 grids, each with a flat monochrome icon. And it previews the 4 core narratives. A massive leap into a service-based economy, milestone victories in public health, an explosion in digital infrastructure, and a surprising triumph in institutional governance.
But the executive summary doesn't let us get too comfortable. It explicitly notes that this transition has shadows. It warns us right up front about the looming threats of an aging population and some deep structural labor market flaws.
Right.
So we have this tension right from the start. We are looking at a story of incredible progress, but a progress that is fundamentally uneven.
Precisely. And to understand why it's uneven, we really have to start with the engine of the transformation itself. We have to look at how they built the wealth in the first place.
Let's jump right into the macroeconomic leap then. The visual for this on slide 3 is striking. It's a smooth, dark blue line chart against that pure white background. There are no grid lines to distract you.
It's just the pure data trend.
Yeah, it simply tracks gross national income, or GNI, per capita, using the Atlas method. And there's this bold, dashed red arrow pointing upward. It starts way down at roughly $300 in the early years, and it points all the way up to $7,100.
That is just a staggering jump.
Right, and right in the middle of that red arrow is a stark annotation that says, greater than 25x growth.
We really need to pause and truly unpack what a 25-fold increase in national income per capita actually means for a society over just a few decades.
Yeah, lay that out for us.
Well, when a country is sitting at $300 per capita, you are largely looking at an economy functioning in survival mode. You are dealing with widespread subsistence agriculture, massive informal markets, and, a severe lack of capital for state infrastructure.
At $300 a year, you aren't talking about disposable income or saving for a mortgage.
No, not at all.
You are talking about the daily struggle for basic caloric needs and shelter.
Exactly. But when you hit 7 to $100 per capita, you have successfully pulled the nation out of the lower income tiers and firmly planted it into the upper middle income bracket.
And everything changes at that point.
The entire mechanics of society change. You have a massive urban consumer class, you have functioning credit markets, you have disposable income driving domestic retail, and crucially, you have a tax base that can actually fund complex public services.
But how does a country physically execute that kind of leap? I mean, you don't just multiply your wealth by 25 by asking everyone to work 25 times harder at the exact same jobs.
No, you definitely don't. And this is where we have to look at the mechanics of escaping the low income trap.
Mm.
If you look at the industrial restructuring data on slide 4, you see exactly how they did it.
Yeah, the presentation visualizes this with a 100% stack area chart. It uses these really elegant gray to blue gradients to show the relative share of agriculture, industry, and services in the economy.
And the data there is just wild.
It is. The service sector's value added skyrocketed from under $1 billion to over $6.3 billion, measured in constant 2015 dollars.
And the designer highlights this specific blue wedge of the chart, the service sector, with a sharp black wireframe circle labeling it the service sector dividend release zone.
Dividend release zone. That sounds very technical.
It is, but it's the core mechanism of modernization. You cannot multiply your national income exponentially by simply planting more crops or running heavy legacy manufacturing.
Because there's limit. Right.
Exactly. Agriculture eventually hits a hard ceiling of land yield, and legacy-heavy industry often just gets completely outcompeted by massive global players. So to break out, you have to move your workforce into higher value, knowledge-based, or consumer-facing services.
So we are talking about information technology, finance, international tourism, telecommunications.
Precisely. That is the dividend release zone.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine a massive older ship that is trying to cross an ocean. For decades, it's been powered by a heavy, dirty, coal-fired steam engine. It chugs along, but there's a hard limit to how fast it can go, no matter how much coal you shovel into it.
I like this.
Then, mid-journey, they managed to swap out that old boiler for a sleek, high-efficiency electric motor. Suddenly, the ship is cutting through the water, moving much faster, running much cleaner. That's the service sector dividend.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But here's my question. What happens to the people down in the boiler room who spent their entire lives trained to shovel coal?
And that is the exact friction point of rapid economic transformation. When you rewrite the economic engine that fast, the workforce DNA has to change basically overnight.
The physical reallocation of labor must be jarring.
Extremely jarring. The people who were engaged in subsistence agriculture or industrial factory work suddenly find themselves in an economy that demands entirely different skills. The new engine requires digital literacy, customer service etiquette, language skills, and advanced education.
You literally have to uproot people. You are pulling them from rural fields and placing them into urban call centers, IT parks, and corporate banks.
Exactly. And this rapid shift to an urbanized, service-based economy sets the stage for every single societal tension we are going to look at today. Because when you change the way people work, you fundamentally change how they live, how they build families, and how their bodies age.
Which brings us perfectly to the demographic paradox, because if you want to understand this new workforce, you really have to look at the physical population. And the data here completely shatters conventional assumptions.
It is one of the most counterintuitive realities in the entire data set.
Okay, so imagine slide 5. It's a dual-axis chart. On the left axis, you have these flat, cold, gray bars representing the total population of the country. And I mean flat.
Yeah, almost no movement.
Right. For decades, the population is hovering right around or even slightly dipping below 3 million people. But on the right axis, there's this aggressive orange line climbing steeply.
And that line represents the old age dependency ratio.
Right, the number of people 65 and older relative to the working age population. It jumps from around 10% to over 20%.
And there is a bold red warning circle right on the latter half of that orange line labeled the aging acceleration inflection point.
Okay, this is where I have to step in and play the skeptic. Because if you imagine you are looking at a country that just multiplied its per capita income by 25 times, you would logically expect one of two things to happen, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
Either you see a massive baby boom because people finally feel economically secure enough to have large families, or you see a massive influx of immigration because there's this booming service economy creating thousands of new jobs. So why is Armenia's population completely flatlining while its bank accounts are growing exponentially?
It's a brilliant question, and answering it requires us to break down the actual sociology of a service economy. Because economic transformation doesn't automatically reverse demographic trends. In many cases, it actively accelerates them.
How so? That seems backward.
Well, let's go back to your analogy of moving people from the agricultural fields to the urban service centers. When an economy relies on agriculture, children are often viewed economically as assets.
Oh, because they can help work the farm.
Exactly. They contribute to the subsistence labor pool. But when you transition to a service economy, people move to cities.
Urbanization.
Precisely. And in an urbanized service economy, the economic calculus of a family completely flips. Children are no longer labor assets, they become essentially significant economic liabilities.
Because everything costs more.
Right. You have to pay for urban housing, which is far more expensive per square foot. You have to pay for higher education because, as we just discussed, the new economy requires advanced skills.
Right.
Furthermore, the service economy pulls women into the workforce, leading to dual-income households where time is scarce. When you combine the high cost of urban living with the necessity of higher education and dual-income careers, fertility rates naturally plummet.
So the very mechanism that makes them wealthy, the urban service sector, is the exact mechanism that suppresses their birth rate.
Exactly. And when you factor in the historical context of emigration in previous decades, where working-age people left to find opportunities abroad before the service sector boomed, you have hollowed out the reproductive age cohorts.
Wow.
So you arrive at this paradox: the wealth scales up, but the human scale stagnates.
And the economic implications of that orange line, the dependency ratio crossing 20%, that must be terrifying for a finance minister.
Oh, it is what economists call scale stagnation, and it is a massive headwind. Think about the mechanics of it. You have a shrinking base of young working-age people. These are the people generating the tax revenue and powering the IT and finance sectors.
Right.
But they have to support a rapidly expanding base of retirees. As that dependency ratio doubles, every single worker in the economy has to become exponentially more productive just to maintain the current standard of living, let alone drive future growth.
They're carrying a heavier and heavier backpack while trying to sprint forward. And I imagine an aging population completely changes what a country requires from its infrastructure, particularly its hospitals.
It forces a total redesign of the state's obligations, which leads us directly into the public health data. This is where we see a masterclass in how data tells a story of unintended consequences.
Yeah, the presentation splits the health narrative into two distinct visual stories on slides 7 and 6.
Wow!
Let's start with the triumph on slide 7, because the visual is incredibly uplifting.
It really is.
It's a step-down line chart tracking child mortality over 30 years, done in this dark green color. And superimposed over the entire background is this massive, downward-pointing, transparent green arrow. It represents a literal cliff-like drop in infant and under 5 mortality.
And it shows the confidence intervals, too, those shadow bands.
Yeah. The data notes that the neonatal mortality lower bounds dropped from over 1,000 down to around 300. It is a monumental victory.
It is one of the purest indicators of a functional state. Dropping neonatal mortality that aggressively means the basic systems of public health have been successfully deployed.
Like basic sanitation and stuff.
Yes. It means the state learned how to deliver clean water to rural areas, how to manage mass vaccination campaigns, and how to build maternity wards with basic intensive care capabilities. They successfully protected their most vulnerable new citizens from the classic diseases of poverty.
But then you look at the other slide in this section, slide 6, and the mood immediately shifts. The data notes on a mini-line chart that life expectancy has steadily climbed to roughly 76 years. On paper, that sounds fantastic. People are living longer.
It does sound great.
But underneath that number is a horizontal bar chart revealing a much darker reality. A staggering 90% of deaths in the country are now caused by non-communicable diseases, or NCDs.
We're talking about cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer, and diabetes.
And there's a straight line call-out pointing to the end of that bar that reads, systemic medical challenges from lifestyle and aging.
This brings us to a crucial concept in public health, known as the epidemiological transition. We really need to unpack how this works on a physical, societal level over 3 decades.
Let's do it, because it feels like a cruel trick. You fix the health system, people live longer, and suddenly you have a massive crisis of chronic disease.
To understand the epidemiological transition, we have to move away from abstract numbers and look at the cellular biology and daily routines of the population. In the 1990s, when the country was at that $300 per capita level, The primary threats to human life were acute and communicable.
Right.
It was bacterial infections, waterborne illnesses, and complications during childbirth. If you contracted a severe infection, it could kill you in a matter of weeks.
Right, the diseases are fast and direct.
Exactly. But as the economy transitions to that electric motor service sector, daily life completely changes. People move away from physically demanding agricultural labor, they move into cities, they take sedentary desk jobs in call centers or IT firms.
And their diets change too, right?
Yeah. Drastically. Their diets shift from locally grown produce to processed, calorie-dense foods that are easily available in urban centers. And they experience the chronic stress of modern urban living.
So their entire physical environment is rewritten.
Yes, yes. And simultaneously, because the basic healthcare system has stopped them from dying of infections in their youth, their bodies are now living long enough to experience the compounding damage of this new lifestyle.
Wow.
Over 20, 30, or 40 years, that sedentary desk job and processed diet slowly alter their lipid profiles. Plaque builds up in the arteries, insulin resistance develops, cellular mutations accumulate into oncology risks.
It makes me think of a civil engineering analogy.
Yeah.
Imagine a city that historically suffered from catastrophic sudden floods. The floods would wipe out entire neighborhoods overnight. So the city spends decades building this incredible state-of-the-art system of dams and storm drains. They completely conquer the flood risk. The engineers celebrate. But 30 years later, they realize that the heavy, durable pipes they used to build that new water system are slowly leaching lead into the drinking supply.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
They solved the immediate catastrophic threat, the floods, or in this case, infant mortality and infectious disease. But the very infrastructure of their new, modern reality introduced a slow, invisible chronic toxicity that is now poisoning the population over decades.
And just like a city dealing with lead pipes, a health system built to manage floods cannot easily pivot to managing chronic toxicity.
Why not?
Well, the medical infrastructure required to deliver vaccines and build neonatal units is completely different from the infrastructure required to manage decades of chronic cardiovascular disease or complex oncology.
How so? I mean, a hospital is a hospital, right?
Not structurally. A vaccination campaign is a logistical exercise. You buy the vaccines, you maintain a cold chain, and you inject the population once or twice. It is highly effective and relatively low cost per capita.
Okay, that makes sense.
But managing non-communicable diseases, that requires a lifetime of intervention. It requires funding daily medications like statins or insulin for millions of people. It requires incredibly expensive diagnostic imaging like MRI machines. It requires highly specialized oncologists and cardiothoracic surgeons.
So it's way more expensive.
Exponentially more. It shifts the burden from public health logistics to hyper-expensive, personalized, lifelong chronic care.
And remember that demographic paradox we just discussed. You have a shrinking base of young workers trying to generate the tax revenue to pay for these wildly expensive MRI machines and oncology treatments for an exploding population of retirees who are suffering from these chronic NCDs.
Exactly. The financial math of the epidemiological transition is brutal if productivity doesn't keep up. Furthermore, while lifestyle choices like diet and exercise drive a significant portion of these non-communicable diseases, environmental factors play a massive, unavoidable role.
Which is the perfect transition to the next slides. Because you can choose to eat a salad instead of processed food, and you can choose to go for a run after your sedentary desk job. But you absolutely cannot choose the air you breathe.
Precisely. Let's look at how the physical environment absorbed the impact of this 25x economic boom.
The presentation tackles the ecological balancing act in two parts. Again, we start with a very surprising victory on slide 10. There is a minimalist forest green line chart that tracks land use, specifically forest cover.
And the line is remarkably stable.
Yeah, it holds incredibly steady between 11.5% and 11.7% over the course of decades. Flanking this green line are two dashed parallel lines, creating what the slide calls an ecological bottom line.
Right.
The visual message is clear. They held the line. They didn't chop down their forests to fuel their rapid industrialization.
And we must acknowledge how rare that is. If you look at the historical modernization playbooks of many rapidly developing economies, the natural resources are almost always the first things liquidated for quick capital.
Right. They just sell off the timber.
Exactly. Forests are cleared for timber exports, or burned to make way for massive agricultural expansion to feed the growing cities. The fact that Armenia held that ecological bottom line while multiplying its national wealth by 25 is a massive governance victory.
But as with everything in this deep dive,
Yeah.
there is a trade-off. And that trade-off hits you in the face when you look at the air quality data on slide 11.
The air became the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah. The slide shows a vertical bar chart, mostly in these stark grays. Cutting horizontally right across the bottom quarter of the chart is a glaring dashed red line.
That's the WHO standard, right?
Yes, that line represents the World Health Organization's standard for PM 2.5 air pollution, which is 10 micrograms per cubic meter. And above that dashed red line, covered in the massive chunks of the bars that exceed it, is a semi-transparent blood red shadow.
It's a very striking visual.
Very ominous. The data shows Armenia's annual PM 2.5 exposure fluctuating dangerously between 27 and 43 micrograms per cubic meter. That red shadow is huge.
To understand the gravity of that red shadow, we have to define what PM 2.5 actually is. We aren't just talking about visible smog or dust that makes you cough.
Right.
PM 2.5 refers to fine particulate matter that is 2.5 micrometers or smaller in diameter. To put that in perspective, a single grain of sand is about 90 micrometers.
Oh, it's microscopic.
It is so microscopic that when you inhale it, it doesn't just irritate your lungs. It is small enough to completely bypass your respiratory system's natural defenses, the mucus and cilia in your throat and lungs.
Oh, wow.
It penetrates deep into the alveolar region of the lungs and literally crosses the barrier directly into your bloodstream.
Wait, so you are breathing particles directly into your veins?
Yes. And once those microscopic particles of heavy metals, unburned hydrocarbons, and industrial chemicals are in your bloodstream, they cause systemic inflammation. They damage the lining of your blood vessels. They promote blood clotting.
Wait, if we connect this directly back to the public health data, the 90% mortality rate from non-communicable diseases, the cardiovascular disease and the strokes.
Now you see the biological link. High, sustained exposure to PM 2.5 living year after year in that 27 to 43 microgram range is a massive, globally recognized driver of cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, stroke, and respiratory cancers. The environment and public health are not separate silos. They are intimately biologically linked.
So the narrative of these slides is painfully clear. They fiercely protected their forest to land. But to power the new urban centers, the vehicles, the construction of the service economy, the air quality was fundamentally compromised.
Exactly.
They kept the trees, but the air the urban workers are breathing is actively contributing to the chronic disease crisis that is overwhelming the healthcare system.
It is the classic tension of rapid modernization. You solve one massive problem, economic stagnation and extreme poverty, but you generate a severe negative externality, toxic air pollution. And fixing a systemic, invisible issue like airborne particulate matter is exponentially harder than simply drawing a legal border around a forest to prevent logging.
Why is it harder? I mean, can't they just pass a law?
Because protecting a forest requires stopping an action. You tell the logging companies no, but cleaning up PM 2.5 requires rebuilding the foundational infrastructure of daily life. It means transitioning the entire national vehicle fleet to higher emission standards.
Oh, which costs a fortune.
Right. It means overhauling industrial filtration systems. It means changing how the country generates winter heating. It requires incredibly strong, transparent governance. And crucially, it requires a highly educated populace that understands the complex data and can effectively demand nuanced policy changes.
Well, if they need a highly educated populace to demand those changes, they certainly have the raw materials for it. Let's move to the data on human capital, education, and the digital leap, because this is where the data set becomes almost utopian.
The human capital metrics here are truly world-class.
Let's look at the education data on slide 8. The designer uses a minimalist dumbbell plot. Imagine a horizontal line representing youth literacy people ages 15 to 24. Usually on a plot like this, you would see a dot for men's literacy and a dot for women's literacy, with a gap between them showing the gender disparity.
Right, there's almost always a gap.
But on this slide, the dots perfectly overlap. They sit right between 99% and 100%. The designer actually drew a very thin, precise box around that single overlap dot with a callout that says, absolute gender equality, GPI approximately 1.
GPI being the gender parity index. We have to pause and appreciate the structural triumph of this. In many developing economies, as wealth grows, education scales unevenly. Young men are often prioritized for secondary and tertiary education, while young women are left behind due to cultural norms or early marriage pressures.
Right, that's a very common pattern.
To achieve not just universal youth literacy, but flawless, absolute educational parity between young men and young women is staggering. It means the foundational layer of human capital is as solid and egalitarian as it can possibly be.
And it doesn't stop at reading textbooks. The next slide, slide 9, takes this human capital directly into the 21st century. It's a line chart filled with a smooth gradient tracking internet usage over time.
A very steep curve.
Yeah, it starts at near zero in the early years and then just explodes upward into universal access. There's an annotation over the steepest part of the curve with slanted parallel guidelines labeling it the digital leap.
And the numbers inside that leap are fascinating.
They really are, because here is the statistic that made me do a double take. Female internet usage is at 79.3%, which is actually higher than male usage at 74.4%.
Think about the sociological implications of that single data point. You don't just have an educated youth, you have a digitally native youth. And you have a demographic, women who historically, in almost every developing transition around the globe, are the ones left on the wrong side of the digital divide.
But here, they are actually leading the adoption metrics.
It's incredible.
Imagine you were an international investor sitting in a boardroom in London or New York, looking at a profile of this country. You see a 25x growth in G&I. You see a massive shift to a high-value service economy.
You're liking what you see so far.
Right. And then you see that you have fully literate, highly digital youth population where the young women are actually out-surfing the young men on the internet. You would look at your partners and say, this workforce is an absolute juggernaut. We need to pour all our capital into this market immediately.
Right.
Any rational investor would think exactly that. The raw human capital is undeniably world-class. But we have to introduce a crucial economic concept here. Human capital is only potential energy.
Potential energy. I love that framing. Explain that. Having a brilliant, 100% literate, digitally connected young woman is potential energy. It is the fuel. But to turn that potential energy into kinetic economic motion, into actual businesses, innovations, and tax revenue, the state needs the institutions to support her.
Right.
That brilliant young coder cannot build a successful software startup if she has to pay bribes to a local official just to get a commercial Wi-Fi permit. She cannot attract international clients if she cannot trust the domestic courts to enforce her software licensing contracts.
She has the skills, but the environment around her determines if she can actually deploy them.
Precisely. Which brings us perfectly to the container for that energy, the institutional frameworks.
Let's dive into the governance data. And I know we need to be careful here to remain strictly impartial and analytical. We aren't talking about politics or specific politicians. We are looking purely at structural, globally recognized metrics.
Yes. The metrics used in this presentation are drawn from the worldwide governance indicators, which are rigorously standardized to allow for cross-country comparisons over time. We're looking at the structural architecture of the state, not the partisan rhetoric.
Okay, so the first visual here on slide 12 tracks anti-corruption. It's a step-up line chart surrounded by these light error shadow bands to show the confidence intervals of the data. Right through the middle of the chart, piercing upward through a major leap node, is a thick, heavy black arrow.
And that arrow represents a massive shift.
It illustrates the control of corruption global percentile. And the jump is dramatic. It goes from languishing in the bottom quarter of the world at 21.9%, leaping all the way up to 57.6%. And there's a text box explaining the structural effects of this institutional anti-corruption.
To understand the magnitude of crossing that 50th percentile threshold, we have to meticulously define what control of corruption means in this specific index. A lot of people hear corruption, and they immediately think of petty bribery, slipping a traffic cop $20 to avoid a speeding ticket, or paying a clerk to expedite a passport.
Right, the everyday friction.
Petty corruption is annoying, but it doesn't usually prevent an economy from growing. What this metric captures is much deeper. It measures the extent to which public power is exercised for private gain, specifically focusing on grand corruption and the capture of the state by elites and private interests.
Let's break down elite capture. What does that actually look like on the ground?
Elite capture is when a small group of powerful individuals or oligarchs essentially write the rules of the economy to protect their own monopolies.
Oh, like rigging the game.
Exactly. It means they control the import licenses, so no new competitor can bring in cheaper goods. It means state construction tenders are secretly rigged to only go to their own companies. It means the regulatory agencies are weaponized to audit and shut down any upstart business that threatens their market share. In a captured state, the economy is a walled garden where only the connected elites are allowed to harvest the fruit.
So when you move a country from the 21.9th percentile to the 57.6th percentile, when you cross over from the bottom half of the globe into the top half, you aren't just stopping traffic cops from taking bribes.
No, you are structurally dismantling those walled gardens. You are breaking up the monopolies and democratizing access to the economy.
It is a structural earthquake. And the next slide, slide 13, expands on how they replace those walled gardens with formal, transparent rules.
And visually, it's very clean.
It's a gridless double-line chart. One line in dark blue tracks regulatory quality, which has steadily risen above the 60th percentile. The other line, in light blue, tracks the rule of law, which is nearing the 50th percentile. And on the right side of the slide, the designer has placed this large curly bracket, grouping the two lines together with a fantastic label.
Okay.
Institutional moat for the business environment.
Institutional moat is a brilliant piece of analytical phrasing. Think back to our discussion about the service sector dividend. If you are running a traditional subsistence-level potato farm, you rely on the rain, the soil, and your own physical labor. Your day-to-day need for complex legal frameworks and regulatory quality is relatively low.
You just need the crops to grow.
Right. But what happens when you transition to a modern service economy? What happens when your economy relies on IT outsourcing, international financial services, and global tourism?
A whole different ballgame.
Exactly. Those industries are entirely intangible. They do not exist without high trust, enforceable legal contracts, intellectual property protection, and clean, predictable regulation.
If I am an international company outsourcing my data management to a firm in Armenia, I don't care about the soil quality. I care whether the legal system will protect my proprietary data if a contract is breached.
Exactly. That regulatory quality and rule of law is the moat that protects the castle of the service economy. Without dismantling the elite capture and building that institutional moat, the explosive growth we saw in the service sector would have been mathematically impossible.
Okay, let's pause and look at the masterpiece we have just painted. Because if you stop the presentation right here, it sounds like an absolute economic utopia.
It really does.
We have an economy that swapped its coal engine for an electric motor, multiplying national wealth by 25. We have 100% youth literacy with flawless gender parity. We have a highly digital population where women lead internet adoption. We have a state that held the line on forest conservation. And we have a governance structure that successfully dismantled elite corruption and built a robust regulatory moat for international business.
It is the textbook definition of a successful modernization playbook.
It really is.
Yeah.
But then you turn to the second to last slide of the deck, slide 14, and the entire narrative fractures. The tension in the visual instantly makes you sit up straight.
It is the climax of the entire deep dive. It is the shadow we warned about in the executive summary, finally coming into full view.
The slide is titled Social Vulnerability. It's a scatter plot matrix. There are lots of little data points distributed across a grid, but the designer has drawn these rough, gray, dashed circles around very specific clusters of data. And the label pointing to these circles reads, Social crevices urgently needing policy intervention.
Right, the social crevices.
When you zoom in on what is actually inside those gray circles, the data reveals stubbornly high proportions of NEET youth.
For clarity for you listening, NEET is a standard labor economic acronym that stands for Not in Employment, Education, or Training. It represents completely unengaged youth.
Right, young people sitting entirely idle. And the other gray dashed circle highlights a stubbornly high rate of women stuck in what the data classifies as vulnerable employment, which generally means informal work, without contracts, without Social Security, or without stable income.
This slide breaks down the ultimate devastating paradox of this entire socioeconomic data set. Think carefully about the pieces we just put together. We have absolute 100% female youth literacy. We have 79% female internet penetration. We have a booming, modernized, digitally driven service economy.
Yeah.
Yet, despite possessing the exact human capital required for this new economy, and despite being the most educated and connected demographic cohorts in the history of the country, significant portions of youth and women are being structurally excluded from the very economic boom the country is experiencing.
I am honestly mind blown by this. Let me use another analogy to try and wrap my head around it. It's like the country spent 30 years building a state-of-the-art supercomputer. They poured billions into acquiring the absolute best hardware, the 100% literacy. They installed the fastest, most expansive fiber optic internet connections, the digital leap.
Okay, I see where you're going.
They built a secure, air-conditioned server room to house it the institutional governance mode. And then, wait, sorry, no ellipses. And then they left half of the processors completely unplugged from the motherboard. Why? Why are the most educated, digitally connected demographics sitting in the neat and vulnerable categories while the economy booms?
Because possessing human capital, having the literacy and the internet access, does not automatically guarantee economic inclusion if the structural architecture of the labor market is fundamentally flawed. It reveals that the potential energy we talked about is being blocked by invisible barriers.
What kind of barriers? I mean, if they have the skills, why aren't they getting the jobs?
Let's theorize based on the data patterns of developing economies. Let's look at the women in vulnerable employment. Why isn't a highly literate, digitally connected woman getting a formal job in the booming service sector?
Yeah, why?
It is highly likely due to a lack of structural social support, primarily affordable childcare. If the urban service economy demands inflexible 50-hour work weeks in an office and there is no state-subsidized childcare, women are forced to remain in the informal economy where they can control their hours, even if it means vulnerable, unprotected labor. The economy modernized, but the societal expectations of domestic caregiving did not.
Wow. So the jobs exist, but the rigid structure of the jobs makes it impossible for women to participate. What about the youth? Why are the fully literate young men and women falling into the NEET category?
This usually points to a severe mismatch between academic education and vocational reality. Achieving 100% basic literacy is an incredible metric for basic human rights. But being able to read and write perfectly does not mean you know how to code in Python or manage a cloud server or perform financial risk analysis.
Right, the specific skills.
If the educational system is still geared toward traditional rote learning academics, it will produce highly literate young people who are entirely unqualified for the hyper-specific niche needs of the new IT and finance sectors. They are qualified on paper, but completely mismatched in reality. So they sit idle, waiting for jobs that match their generalized skills, while the service sector imports talent or leaves positions unfilled.
And if we tie this entirely excluded population back to Section 2, well, back to the demographic paradox, the flatlining population and the soaring dependency ratio.
Exactly. You've connected the entire system.
The aging acceleration inflection point means the country has a shrinking pool of working-age people trying to support a massive elderly population burdened with chronic diseases. When your dependency ratio is soaring past 20%, you absolutely cannot afford to waste a single drop of human capital.
That is the crux of the crisis. Having highly educated women and youth sitting in the NEET or vulnerable categories isn't just a matter of social fairness or equity. It is a macroeconomic emergency.
It's an existential threat to the economy.
If that dependency ratio keeps climbing and that supercomputer wants to keep running, it absolutely has to figure out how to plug in all its processors. It needs every single capable citizen generating formal tax revenue to pay for the chronic health care of the aging population.
It is a breathtakingly complex puzzle. Which brings us finally to the conclusion of the presentation, slide 15, the summary and strategic outlook. After all the complex charts, the scatter plots, and the error bands, the designer strips away all the data visualization for this final note. It's incredibly stark.
Just a clean synthesis.
Yeah, just a text-only 3-column board with large, bold text summarizing the ultimate structural realities we've uncovered. Column 1 says service transformation, column 2 says governance dividend, and column 3 says population and environmental challenges.
It's the perfect synthesis. It forces you to hold the triumphs and the tragedies in your mind simultaneously. It reminds us of the sheer, undeniable necessity of looking at multidimensional data when diagnosing a society. If you only looked at the macroeconomic chart, the GNI per capita soaring by 25 times, you would pop champagne, declare absolute victory, and go home.
But you can't just look at the bank accounts.
No, you really can't. You have to look at who is breathing the air. You have to remember that massive red shadow of PM 2.5 pollution slowly driving chronic disease. You have to look at who is on the internet celebrating the digital leap. And crucially, you have to look into the social crevices and see who is still getting left entirely out of the formal job market despite doing everything right.
It's a triumph. But it's a deeply complicated, ongoing triumph. And it leaves me with a thought I want to pass on to you, to mull over long after we sign off today. Think about your own industry, your own community, or even your own country. Imagine you successfully execute the perfect modernization playbook. You transition your economy to high-value services, you build out flawless digital infrastructure, you fiercely protect your forests, you clean up elite corruption, and you educate your entire youth population to 100% literacy.
You do everything right.
Right. But even after doing all of that flawlessly, well, you still can't figure out how to integrate those educated young people and women into the actual engines of the workforce. If that happens, what part of the modernization playbook is the world still getting fundamentally wrong?
It challenges the very definition of what it means to be a developed society.
Yeah.
And it is the question every rapidly transforming economy on Earth needs to answer before their demographic clocks run out.
Something to seriously think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Armenian transformation. It's been an absolute masterclass in looking past the simple, top-line numbers and learning how to read the complex, messy, and fascinating structural reality of an entire nation. We'll see you next time.